This conference will now be recorded.
The Clatsop County Planning Commission meeting for Tuesday, September 14th, 2021 will come to order. Would staff please call the roll?
All right, apparently Clancy is having trouble connecting. So Nadia Gardner.
Present.
John Orr.
Please unmute yourself, John. Actually, everybody.
I can see that he is here, and we did hear him speak. Lum Kwong.
Here.
Robert Strickland.
Here.
Chris Farrar.
Present.
Carrie Johnson.
Here.
Okay. We do have a quorum.
Great, thank you, Director Henriksen. So I'd like to just take a moment to welcome the public. The Planning Commission is the official venue for public involvement in Clatsop County, and so we thank you for your interest and involvement, and we welcome your thoughts at any time via email or verbal comments, public comments in our meetings, and also as part of the comprehensive planning update process. So we'll move on to the agenda. I'll take a motion and a second to adopt the agenda as presented.
I move we adopt the agenda for the September 14th meeting as presented.
Second. Robert.
Commissioner Farrar has moved and Commissioner Strickland has seconded. All those in favor say aye.
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 The motion passes unanimously. Thank you. Next, we'll do business from the public. This is an opportunity for anyone to give a brief presentation about any land use planning issue or county concern that's not a public hearing on the agenda. All speakers from the floor are asked to state their name and address before speaking. And if you're representing an organization, please identify who you represent. Do we have anyone who wishes to speak? All right, hearing none, then we'll move on to our foundation building topics. I go ahead and invite county staff to present.
Good morning. This is Joanna Lyons-Antley. Can everybody hear me okay? All right, I'm the county counsel, which means I'm the general counsel or attorney for Clatsop County. And we're gonna just talk about basically how the planning laws work with the, I will say the regular Oregon revised statutes today. And if I'm confusing or you have questions, feel free to interrupt, ask your questions, and hopefully we can kind of resolve this. But I don't anticipate that this is going to be a very long conversation today. This is really more of a structural kind of overview, 5,000-foot view of how the laws work and really how we get to land use decisions. So first of all, I think Gail gave you, Director Henriksen gave you an excellent overview of how Oregon planning came about. Many of you know that our planning laws and planning are very different than many other states. It is a creature of Oregon statute, which of course is something that we work together with the federal government to try to be a partner, especially with the coastal goals. So really the foundation of where we started is the Oregon revised statutes. And again, I'm going to defer to Gail, Director Henriksen, to talk about the different statewide planning goals. So if you look at that first slide, this is something that I took from a statewide planning group, but I've modified it for us. You'll see a bunch of different bubbles. And in the upper left-hand corner, it says Oregon revised statutes. So way back when, I know it was the late 70s, early 80s, the Oregon legislature passed a law that said we are going to have land use laws. And so that is the basis of what we have. Now, since then, there's been lots of reiterations of how the legislature has determined what those statutes will be. But essentially, what was created is an administrative agency that adopted statewide planning goals. So you can see that in the upper right-hand corner. And again, Gail's going to talk about that. That's typical of goal 1, goal 2, all of those goals that you hear about. Those are a creature of administrative rules. Okay. And then the Oregon administrative rules are really to flesh out any of those statutes. So I know it's a little confusing, but basically the statutes are the thing that we started with, and then we have the goals and we have the rules. On the local level, we have our local comprehensive plans. And if you recall, those local comprehensive plans are something that we've been, kind of move my camera down a little bit, have been something that we've been working on. Initially, we got acknowledged, and I want to say the early 1980s, that's when most local governments got acknowledged. Acknowledgement means that our local comprehensive plan is consistent with the statewide planning goals. And those comprehensive plans are just kind of those guidelines. The way we implemented those local comprehensive plans is through our local ordinances. Now, we are not alone. I think it would be a rare thing if you didn't have 2 different types of ordinances. The first is the law doc. So that is the, y'all help me out here, the water development and use.
Land and Water Development and Use Code.
Thank you. And that is only specific for planning purposes. We also have a code of regulations. So that code of regulations is for not just planning, but all business regulations that we have. So really, when we talk about when we're doing a code amendment, generally the code amendments that you're going to be involved in are going to be in those law doc. But I would be remiss not to tell you about the code of regulations as well. They're probably more tangential. The law doc is really where the focus of the requirements for any of the applications that come through or any development decisions that are made, that is really the basis and the rules that we follow, the laws that we follow. You can imagine they all have to be consistent with each other, and it's in a certain priority order. So you can see that Oregon Revised Statute obviously has the highest precedent. And if we make land use decisions that aren't consistent with our own code of regulations or law doc or not consistent with Oregon Revised Statutes, they can definitely be appealed and taken to the appropriate authority, whether that be LUBA, Land Use Board of Appeals, or the Circuit Court. So this is just kind of give you a visual of where what we're kind of working with when we talk about land use decisions. It's not easy. There is many different layers within each of these different bubbles, but it gives you kind of an overview, like I said, 5,000, 10,000 foot view of what we're talking about here. When we talk about, there's some different unique things. I just want to kind of point this out, and then I'm going to turn it over to Gail. There's some unique things because we live on the coast, right? And because we have such a beautiful scenic area that is rightfully so given additional protections for the public to protect it. And so the federal government has the coastal, the state has the Coastal Zone Management Act that is consistent with the federal government. And so working together, we have this management program, and a lot of the goals, almost all of the goals, the statewide planning goals apply to Clatsop County, except for that Willamette Greenway goal, which of course we don't have any Willamette Greenway, so it wouldn't apply. But you can imagine, certainly being located on the coast, we have, we're one of the counties that has the most goals that apply to any land use decision. And so with that, I think I'm happy to answer any questions, but really, I think, as we all know, Gail is the expert. Gail and her staff are the expert. And so I know she would like to talk a little bit more about those planning goals. Any questions?
Okay, so seeing no questions, thank you, Joanna. That was a really good overview of how everything relates and sort of the layers of government and rules and regulations that we all operate under. As Joanna stated, the Oregon statewide planning program is very robust. It's very far-reaching. It began in 1973 with the adoption of Senate Bill 100, which basically laid the framework for our current land use planning program here in the county and statewide. As Joanna mentioned, there are 19 goals, statewide planning goals, that we are required to address, with the exception of Goal 15, which deals with the Willamette River Greenway. And if you have not been to the Department of Land Conservation and Development's website, they have a trove of knowledge and documents and background information, and they are very good at explaining about how things work and interrelate. So looking at the 18 goals, there is a summary in your planning packet that provides an overview of what those goals are, and it's a summary of them. But I know the ones that get the most attention, at least in our current situation and current discussions, Goal 1 is probably the most prominent, and it is pretty much the foundation for the remainder of the goals that follow. And Goal 1, which is called citizen involvement, even though the state doesn't prefer that term anymore, they prefer something along the lines of public involvement, is really meant to bring the population of a particular area into the land use planning process. I know that Goal 1 gets interpreted a lot as the Planning Commission is the overall overreaching place where anybody goes to get involved in anything in the county, but Goal 1 is intended to address the land use planning process. So it's important to kind of make that distinction. The Planning Commission is not responsible for budgeting or looking at law enforcement necessarily, or public health, but it is the Committee for Citizen Involvement for Land Use Planning within Clatsop County. And then each of the goals, if you've been following our comprehensive plan update process, which we started back in 2019, the goals are intended to address a variety of things. So we talked about Goal 1. Goal 2, which is land use planning, is basically where we as the county have divided up our land into 6 different categories, ranging from development, which is where we have identified the more intense residential and commercial development uses should go, to more resource-based zones such as the agricultural and forest lands, which is where we find our exclusive farm use zoning and our forestry 80 zones, which are protected pretty much under state statute. And we'll talk about that in just a minute. But this is along with Goal 1, and these are really the 2 foundation stones for our comprehensive plan. From there, we move into Goal 3, which deals with agricultural lands. And agricultural lands are intended to address the resource lands that are zoned exclusive farm use. So Goal 3 doesn't necessarily deal with the small farms that are in the residential agricultural zones. We have a lot more latitude in those areas because they're not so restricted under state statute. And when we talk about agricultural lands and also forest lands in Goal 4, we're really talking about a lot of rules that are coming out of Oregon revised statutes, and specifically in Chapter 215. And if you go to the state website and pull up ORS 215, which deals with county planning, zoning, and housing codes, you'll see that there are lots of different subsections that deal with uses in farm zones, There are subsections that deal with uses in forestry-related zones and certain additional rules for certain types of businesses within those zones. And a lot of this has been set up over the years to address issues that are really outside of Clatsop County. A lot of it's coming out of that Willamette Valley corridor, where we find a lot of the wineries and a lot of the new cidery businesses, breweries, and places where there are significantly more pressures put on farmland to be converted to either commercial or residential uses. So that's really where a lot of these rules stem from in our land and water development and use code. And they're not necessarily things that staff has sat down one day over a cup of coffee and said, let's do this. These are things that we are required to do under state statute. And it's very hard to amend these rules. You have to go up to the legislative level. You got to do a lot of lobbying. And so we get questions a lot of times from people who see a site on a realtor's website, nice beautiful piece of land, zoned EFU, and the realtor may be marketing it as wonderful home site. And it's just not that easy. And I think that frustrates people. I know that it frustrates definitely some of the board members at times, because we know that we have housing issues, but these are not places that have been identified for housing. But this is really where you can find the rules that we're going to have to play by when it comes to updating our comprehensive plan and updating our zoning ordinances. So that's a very important resource to keep in mind. Same thing with forest lands in Goal 4. Added on to all those state regulations would also be the Forest Practices Act, which I think we have talked about quite a bit over the past year or so, year and a half. And the Forest Practices Act is designed to govern timber production, growth, harvesting, and to make sure that uses that aren't associated with that are not encroaching into those areas. And, you know, just like we have people who move in next to farms and then complain about the smell, I think that's the same intent is behind a lot of what goes into Forest Practices Act. It's also intended to make sure that there are appropriate buffers along streams and fish-bearing waterways. Also to you know, provide guidance when there are sprays of herbicides that are going on over timberlands. So those things are all covered at a state level, and we as a county at our county level don't have the ability to go in and regulate more than that. I think it was Josephine or Lane County did this a few years ago and ended up in a very significant lawsuit. I don't know what the outcome of that was, but I know that it was ongoing for a while. So
can I just reaffirm what you're saying, Director Henriksen?
Yeah.
I think, you know, this was one of the first things that I looked at for Clatsop County when I started in 2020. And, you know, I think it's a little, I mean, just for the layperson, confusing because they're not all in the same area planning purposes. They're not as part of the OARs that you would think of, oh, this applies, but it definitely is something to be wary of, and this is why I help staff you all, so we make sure that we follow any recommended changes, we'll follow the law. And sometimes I need an assist, somebody telling me, hey, go look at this, because you can imagine there's just so many laws that could relate, that if they're not all in one place, it's sometimes hard to find them all. But it is one area that is particularly litigious with the Forest Practices Act. And so I think with the review that I've done and some of the changes, I'm hopeful that as we move forward that we can make sure that we stay out of the state law preemption area. So just wanted to say that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
I have a question related to that, if I may ask.
Go ahead, Commissioner Farrar.
The state laws are the rules to be followed on state forest lands and even private forest lands with regard to timber production. But as far as enforcing the rules and the laws, if a county becomes aware of practices being done on land that are not in conformance with the state statutes or the Forest Practices Act, are they required to leave that up to the state to enforce or to bring attention to the problem, or can a county take it on themselves to enforce that state law, or at least start a process where a practice being done in conflict with the law is addressed?
That is a really good question. So the county has some arms of enforcement. I'm going to kind of do a roundabout to answer your question. The county has lots of arms of enforcement. Of course, we've got the sheriff's office to enforce criminal laws. And then there, of course, there's some civil things that they perform. We have county code enforcement who enforces county codes. So often, I think particularly in the area of the Forest Practices Act, those are mostly state laws. They're not county codes. So if we became knowledgeable about something, and we would have to look at what in fact it was violating. If it's violating a county code, we have authority to enforce those county codes. If it's violating just state law and not a criminal issue, then I would say the appropriate way to deal with it would be to refer it to the state agency. And I don't know if Director Henderson has any additional information.
No, I think that sums it up. If we were made aware of a practice that was going on that was potentially in violation of Forest Practices Act, we would refer it to the Department of Forestry because we don't have the jurisdiction to enforce it. All right. Any other questions about goals 1 through 4 before we move on? Okay, so seeing none. So goal 5 is probably the biggest and most complex goal in the whole comprehensive plan. And it really should be at the very end where it says, and other duties as assigned, because it really is a potpourri of everything that didn't quite fit in any other goal. And it's got, I believe, 15 different resource inventories, 12 or 13 of which we're required to actually inventory. And then there's 3 others that are recommended but not actually mandated. And it covers everything from wildlife habitat, energy sources, historic resources, cultural areas, scenic views, recreational trails. There is just, as I said, well over a dozen different resources that each county and city is required to look at. And because Clatsop County has such a rich and diverse set of geography and history, we have a lot of those resources in our county. So going through there, and there is a lot of information in Goal 5. There's a very specific process you use if you want to add a site to your resource inventories, and it's just very complex. And so we spent probably about 6 or 7 months working on Goal 5, just working through the different resource inventories as we've been working on our comprehensive plan update. But again, it's really just a catch-all for everything that was left over that people wanted to address and see some protections about. Goal 6 deals with air, water, and land resources quality. So we're looking at things like water quality, air quality, capacity of the land to be able to support development. And it ties in some respects also with Goal 13, which deals with energy conservation. And we'll talk about that in a minute. Goal 7 is probably the one that most people might be familiar with, or at least aware of, because it deals with natural hazard mitigation. In our area, the most obvious one is a Cascadia subduction event, and then the resulting tsunami. But it can also deal more and more so with wildfires, especially in our area. Some of the severe winter storms that we get, it could deal with increasing drought as we move forward, as climate changes or weather patterns change. So there's a lot that goes in there. Landslides is another one that is prominent in our area as well. And so when we'll be talking about Goal 7 in a few months with the Planning Commission and the Countywide Citizen Advisory Committee, we have recently adopted the multi-jurisdictional natural hazard mitigation plan. And that was adopted, I believe, in March of this year by the board. And that was an exercise that included Clatsop County, the cities, and many of the local special districts, such as fire districts, school districts, water districts, and sanitation districts. And so each of those jurisdictions has developed a list of priorities in terms of what we believe are the most imminent disasters awaiting us, so to speak, and then the projects that we've identified to help mitigate the risks from those disasters moving forward. And so we'll be pulling a lot of policies and language from that plan when we get to our discussion on Goal 7 in a few months. Goal 8, I know the Planning Commission and the Citizen Advisory Committees have already looked at. This deals with recreational needs, and it's slightly different from the recreational trails that we talked about in Goal 5, in that, you know, the trails are just that, trails, but this deals with all sorts of active and passive recreational needs in our county. Our Goal 5 here in Clatsop is based really on the 2006 Parks Master Plan that was done, and we adopted pretty much verbatim every single policy recommendation that was in that document, regardless of whether or not it was directly tied to land use. So if you look at our Goal 8, you'll see policies related to budgeting, to things like you know, putting up signage, building restroom facilities, creating a sliding scale for park user fees, and probably some other things that aren't really tied to the land use planning aspect of it. So we'll be looking at that again as we move forward as well. Goal 9, which deals with economics and the economy. I know as Julia Decker, our planning manager, that is her little, I won't say little, but it is her particular project of choice. She has a lot of involvement in that. And it's really the purpose of the economic goal is not to create an economic development plan necessarily, or to create budgets for the county or things like that, but it's to make sure that as we're identifying what drives the economy, what will drive the economy in the future, to make sure that we have lands available for those types of uses so that we can support that economic development. So it's not the Planning Commission looking at Goal 9 and saying, well, we're going to, you know, create a fund that will provide $500,000 to Industry X. It's just making sure that Industry X has the land available to meet those needs. So I'm going to pause for a little break there. Do we have any questions on Goals 5 through 9 at this point? Okay, seeing none, we will move on. We only have 8 more to go. Goal 10 is also another one that gets a huge amount of attention because it deals with housing. And even reading back in the Water Under the Bridge in the paper, when it goes back to 1946, there's always been a housing crisis, it seems like, in Clatsop County, whether it was driven by, you know, workers during the war or following that and working in the different cannery industries. It just seems that every time you read one of those old snips from the paper, that housing is almost always mentioned. It hasn't changed. It's probably not going to change. And as I explained, with Clatsop County, because so much of our land is resource land. You know, probably 85% of it is zoned for forestry uses. We have exclusive farm use, and then what's left is available for housing development. However, keeping in mind, our rural areas are not set up with usually sewer or a lot of times a water district. So people are drawing from wells and using septic systems. And that does not necessarily support really dense housing type products. And so a lot of that growth does need to be encouraged to be within incorporated city boundaries or within urban growth boundaries, and not necessarily in the rural lands. Back in 2019, the county completed a housing study that was prepared by Angelo Planning Group and I think it was Johnson Economics, that identified a lot of different policy changes and regulation changes that the county and the city should implement in order to increase their housing supply and housing price points. I know that there have been disagreements about the results of that study and how accurate it might be, or why more policy and regulation recommendations were not, you know, tailored specifically to unincorporated Clatsop County. But it does provide a lot of interesting data that was available at the time. I think as we look forward and think about how pandemic may be changing living patterns, we will need to factor that in as we review that study again. But we will be relying on that to some point as we work through updating Goal 10, which will probably be in about 4 or 5 months as we move forward. So goals 11 and 12, I kind of link together in my head. Goal 11 deals with things like the provision of water and sewer, also looks at the more social side of things in terms of law enforcement and fire districts. And what we're looking at with Goal 11 is to identify where those services are available as development occurs, where they should be available, and then planning that in an orderly fashion so that as we transition from rural lands to more developed lands, and eventually as lands become incorporated into urban growth boundaries and then annexed into the cities themselves, we've got this orderly managed transition period of growth and services. What we don't want to do is build a big apartment complex out in the middle of nowhere with no systems to support it and no plans to be able to provide that. And in my head, that also ties in with transportation, because it's just another public facility and service. It transports the goods, the people, the workers from place to place. And you know, if you put your workers out here where there are no public facilities, you're going to have a huge impact on your transportation system. Our transportation system plan was updated in 2015, so it's still relatively current. Again, as we move forward, updating our comprehensive plan, we'll be using that for our initial foundation for changes. Probably in another 5 years or so, we may need to update that again. We also need to really look and see how it might tie in with our tourist population, which has probably changed quite a bit since 2015 and during the pandemic, given how people are looking to be outdoors, people are looking for second homes and looking to be away from more populated areas. All right, Goal 13. This is the one that deals with energy conservation, not only how we use our land to minimize our energy use is really what the Goal 13 boils down to. So it's really things about appropriately locating residential, for example, residential development, to be near enough to commercial services that would support it, like grocery stores, drugstores, you know, whether it be restaurants or employment centers, so that people don't necessarily have to get in a car and drive to everything that they need to accomplish in their daily life. So that's just kind of one example of what we would look for in Goal 13. Goal 14 is urbanization. This is really the plan where we look toward the future, identify which lands are going to have to become incorporated into those urban growth boundaries, and then ultimately incorporate it into a city itself. Again, the whole system of land use planning in the state is built on this preservation of resource lands, farm and forest, and making sure that growth is occurring in a very measured, managed way. Whether or not we're successful all the time in that is a different discussion, but that's really the goal of it. And so this really is looking forward 20 years and in conjunction with our cities to help identify which lands are eventually going to get pulled out of unincorporated county and into an incorporated area. We will skip 15, so I will pause there for questions on goals 10 through 14.
I have sort of a question, if I may.
Go ahead, Commissioner Farrar.
It's kind of a comment and a question regarding urbanization. We've just completed the 2020 census for the whole country, and so we have updated information about population in our cities within the county and the non-urbanized area. And so I'm wondering, is it typical to, at this point in time in the past, when a census is completed, to revisit the urban growth boundaries and to take a look at, whether they have adequate lands within them to meet the changes as seen to date? And with the new census data, it seems population projections might need revision as well. We've got a new data point. We can see whether our models had projected correctly into the future. So it's just kind of a rambling conversation about urbanization. And I was just wondering whether in the completion of the 2010 census was such an undertaking done by the county to look at urban growth.
That's a very good question. I do not know the answer. I was not here in 2010. I know Julia was at least with the county in 2010. I don't know if she has any thoughts or insights that she could provide us.
I really, I don't. I was just transitioning into plannerhood at that time, and that was not on my to-do list.
I know that our local cities have been doing periodic buildable lands inventory and projections about needs. I know Astoria has done it in recent years, and so has Seaside. And there's considerable back and forth over, should you grow more densely and up, or should you grow out? And so it's always kind of a bit of a controversial exercise, and how to include land like in Astoria that has significant slopes and potential slide issues, as well as wetlands and other sensitive areas. I'm always really interested to read about those things. I want to just note one thing that Director Henriksen said, that just in my own experience, that the county's always been in a housing crisis. Maybe it's all relative, but I'll say that when I moved here 20 years ago as a 25-year-old, I could get a cottage, a little one-bedroom cottage in Cannon Beach for $600 a month. And in Astoria, you could buy a house for, under $100,000, and really in the last 10 years, under $200,000. And of course, wages have not gone up significantly in that time, especially in our area. So I would say that today is a different kind of crisis than yesterday. And as you said, it will probably only get worse with climate migration and remote work opportunities for people. it'll be interesting to see how that all puts pressure on our lovely little coastal towns and on our planning processes as well.
Okay, so if there's no more questions on 10 through 14, we'll wrap up here quickly. So 16 and 17 deal with estuarine and coastal resources, and in our comprehensive plan, they are married into one giant goal. But basically, they are looking at two different things, and it's really how to preserve, protect, restore, and responsibly develop in those areas where you find those different types of resources. So goal 16 is going to be primarily concentrated along Columbia River, primarily. Coastal shorelands are going to be those areas that are in the Clatsop Plains, the coastal lakes, and I believe that there are also some identified down in the southwest area of the county as well. And then goals 18 and 19 really deal with our beaches and dunes, how you develop or do not develop the dune system. And goal 19 is really aimed more at state and federal agencies, but it deals more with that territorial water area that's along the beaches into the ocean. And so if you've ever pulled up our goal 19, I believe it was adopted in 2012, and I think it's about 3 pages long. There's not a lot there because there's really not a lot the county can control, but we are required to have goal 19 because we are an oceanfront county. During this last legislative session, there was discussion about creating goal 20, which would have dealt with climate change and would have become a mandatory part of our comprehensive plan. That bill was not approved, but I would suspect that in future legislative sessions that will probably come back up again. And most likely, I would expect that at some point, all the counties and cities will be required to add goal 20 to their comprehensive plan. That's just my speculation. So I will stop there again. Are there any additional questions about goals 16 through 19? I see Commissioner Strickland has his hand up, Chair.
I'm not sure where it fits, but I know the Clatsop Plains Advisory Group was pondering increasing its territory to include the most oceanward reaches of the Columbia River. That currently none of those areas are included in a planning area, which is kind of a quirk. And I just don't want us to forget raising that question of including Desdemona Sands, which historically was Clatsop Sands, as one of our areas of interest that right now is not within the planning areas.
This is why we love having you here, Commissioner Strickland. You bring up important points that I do not know that location. I think somebody was potentially pulling up the location of that, but maybe you could, Gail or Director Henriksen, maybe you could give a little background on that.
Yeah, give me just 1 second here, Chair. So at the last meeting of the Clatsop Plains Citizen Advisory Committee, there was discussion about the fact that the area in the Columbia River is not incorporated into any of the planning areas. And I know at one point, probably back in the late 70s, early 80s, there was discussion about creating a planning area just for the Columbia River Islands. And I don't know the exact history of why that didn't come about or what the decision was. I haven't read up enough on the history of it, but I know that it did not come to fruition. Let me think where we keep the planning layer. Planning areas, there we go. All right, so if you look, you can see Clatsop Plains basically stops at the southern boundary of the city of Warrenton. It doesn't really pick up Fort Stevens, and it doesn't pick up areas here in the Columbia River. Same thing with Lewis and Clark, and the Northeast picks up a few of the islands up here, but for the most part, the islands and the river area are just left outside of any particular planning area. And so they would be addressed primarily through Goal 16, but they're not really incorporated into any of the community plans. So the discussion had been at the last Clatsop Plains meeting whether to make a recommendation that their boundary be extended at a minimum to capture the area north of Warrenton and Fort Stevens, or possibly to incorporate all the Columbia River Islands into their planning area as well. I think the end of the discussion was that you know, it would make sense to pick up this area. It may not make sense to pick up all of the Columbia River area because the needs of the Clatsop Plains and the protections and the development will be very different than what you're going to have up here. So possibly just going back to the original concept of creating this as its own planning area. How you would have citizen involvement for that would be a different question because people don't really live there, but perhaps we can pull the fish and the wildlife. So
it might make sense actually to have it be part of the Northeast actually because of the significant tidal and non-tidal wetlands that are associated with the Columbia in that section as well. You know, just and even though, well, Lewis and Clark, I guess it's kind of a little different, but most of those islands I think are more in the Northeast, and most of them are under the jurisdiction of the National Wildlife Refuge, I believe. But yeah, it's very interesting. Thanks for bringing that up, Commissioner Strickland. Any other questions for staff on these, on the last few goals?
Just on that same topic, yeah, beating it a little bit more. The Olney-Walooski perspective on it certainly had the indigenous interests historically in their heart. So I wouldn't just think of not considering Olney-Walooski, you know, up the Youngs River Falls, et cetera, as part of that planning area. You know, I think there's some historic perspective that I bet we could, about which we could be reminded, you know, as far as the indigenes. And, you know, I don't have any presumptions because I think it's one of those things where, gee, we should read up on it a little bit. How did the indigenes view these areas? And it's rather obvious that they were highly important. You know, the Clatsop Sands, which then became Desdemona Sands, were hugely important as a fishing area, period.
This reminds me of a conversation that I have a lot around the Cape Falcon Marine Reserve, in that Oregon has a hard time remembering that it's not all land, that it doesn't stop at the beach or the river shore in this case. So that maybe it just makes sense that all of the planning boundaries go either north or east, depending, or both in the case of Clatsop Plains, to include Oregon's territorial sea as well. And you know, how much the county has jurisdiction to regulate or change that is, you know, I think certainly they have influence if nothing else, but keeping in mind that we are not separate from the Columbia River and we are not separate from our ocean. In fact, without either, we would be worse off. So, you know, that maybe would be a step in the right direction if we think about that. And in the Southwest, of course, it's the same on the coast. You have the Oregon Islands National Wildlife Refuge. All the offshore rocks are part of that refuge. And then you have a significant conservation area in the Southwest at the Cape Falcon Marine Reserve that starts just south of Arch Cape in Falcon Cove, that separate community there. But certainly with discussions of blue carbon and the new wind and wave energy offshore, our communities will be interested in following what happens as those projects move forward. I expect most of those projects will be on the South Coast. In fact, I think Coos Bay will be epicenter probably just because of especially the wind resources, but it's possible in the long term they'll be proposed up here again. And of course that has scenic impacts, but also has impacts upon our commercial and charter and recreational fishing communities.
Back a few years ago, Clatsop County was filling its oats very much about having something to say about the territorial seas within the jurisdiction of Clatsop County. And it was heavily slapped down, and possibly DLCD has some memory of those exercises. But it was it got into fishing regulations, and the focus was entirely about territorial seas and county jurisdiction in those nearshore territorial seas.
Well, they may not have, like, as I said, enforcement capability, but they certainly have influence, if nothing else. So my point is just that when we're thinking about public involvement and planning in on our shore, we might also extend thinking about it, if nothing else, offshore as well, whether it be the Columbia or the ocean. We should probably move forward now. We could talk about this all day, but
So, Chair, I just had a couple of things to wrap up here, and then I'll be done with this. But I just wanted to point out there are a lot of great resources at the state level, especially through Department of Land Conservation and Development. I'll paste these into the chat box later on, but just to point out again that the 18 goals, you can go in and read each goal and in depth. We've also got the department, the Coastal Management Program and all their information. And I wanted to point out, if you look at a map for the coastal zone, almost all of Clatsop County, except a tiny bit in the very northeast corner, is within that Coastal Management Zone program area. So all that blue area, so pretty much our entire county is subject to those requirements. And if you haven't had a chance yet, in your packet, in the memo, there's a lot of discussion about the enforceable policies. And that's really important because it gives us some guidance about how to draft policies that can be used by the state and by ourselves to actually, place some parameters on work that is being done at the federal level. We have some limitations. Obviously, we can't just say no federal involvement in Clatsop County, period. But we do have the ability to create enforceable policies. So if you haven't had a chance to look at that in your meeting packet, again, I would encourage you to do that. And that starts on page 5 of your agenda package for today. And with that, I will conclude my presentation. Thank you very much for your time.
thank you, Director Henriksen. If you haven't had a chance to read that memo in depth, I recommend you do so, both commissioners and our visitors today. It was great. And check out those websites. I also want to remind the commissioners that there is a planning commissioner training that's put on by the state coming up on September 29th at 6 o'clock that Director Henriksen sent around to us. And she'd like to hear back from us if we would like to attend by this Thursday at 5 o'clock. So it's just a 2-hour training, and I encourage you, especially if you're new to the commission, to take that opportunity. I feel like even though I've taken a bunch of trainings over the years on especially like special districts and elected and appointed board member rules, you always pick up something. So don't hesitate to connect with Director Henriksen if you're interested in spending 2 hours one of these evenings brushing up on the facts. All right. Any final comments or questions, or we'll move on in the agenda? All right, let's go on. Now we're going to get to the minutes. Feels like a little late, but we wanted to get that, I think, that training out of the way first. So for the minutes of August 10th, 2021, the regular meeting minutes, does anyone have corrections? I'm looking at your tiny cells. If you want to raise your hands or just speak up. If there are no corrections, then we can consider the minutes approved as presented by consensus. Hearing nothing else, let's move on to discussion topics. Our main discussion topic today is the Planning Commission bylaws. Staff, would you please review the materials?
Thank you. So back in May of this year, the board provided direction to staff asking us to draft a statement of rules and responsibilities, which I know have been sent out to you and returned in most cases. When we went through the process of creating that draft statement, we also, as staff, opened up the bylaws to make sure that what we were putting in this proposed statement of roles and responsibilities was also consistent with and did not conflict with anything that's in your existing bylaws. Your existing bylaws were last updated back in 2018, and I know we brought them again in 2019, and there were no changes at that point. So as staff, when we opened up the bylaws and started looking at it, we pulled other jurisdictions just to see what other areas around the state were doing in terms of their planning commission. We also looked at the Clatsop County Board rules and their ground rules for operation and interacting with each other. And then we also looked at the Oregon Planning Commissioner Handbook for other best practices that might be recommended by the Department of Land Conservation and Development. So we put together a first draft, which went back to the board on June 9th, and then also to your joint meeting on July 20th with the Board of Commissioners. And I highlighted in our memo some of the more significant changes, one being that the Planning Commission does not review variance cases. Those under our code are directed to the hearings officer. So we've recommended removing that language from your bylaws. The establishment of term limits, which I know has been generating significant amount of discussion, which would basically limit planning commissioners to 2 full terms. Your terms are currently 4 years each, or up to 10 years if there was a reason that the board would extend it, say to complete a particular project, or if there was nobody who applied to be on the planning commission. We added some language that would allow a planning commission member to be removed if he or she had 2 or more unexcused absences. An unexcused absence is where you just don't show up for a meeting and don't tell anybody you're not going to be there. Don't tell anybody that you've missed the meeting. Just don't bother to show up. So it's not that you have a planned vacation or you have a child who's sick or, you know, some other obligation that you need to take care of where you can say, you know, I'm not going to be able to make the meeting for this reason. It's just when people just don't show up and don't provide any explanation. We've added a little bit more detail regarding the responsibilities of the chair, the vice chair, and staff. put in some language regarding level of conduct for staff, elected officials, the public, and the Planning Commission as we interact with each other. We added language out of our code, which is section 2.2070 of the law doc dealing with bias or the appearance of bias. And I know that this causes some confusion, I think, on the part of people, and that people read that and say, well, I'm not allowed to have an opinion. You certainly are allowed to have an opinion. What the concern is if you have such an opinion, such a strong opinion that it will influence your ability to make an impartial decision on a case based on the requirements of the code. And this has been reason in the past. I don't know about Clatsop County in particular, but in other court cases where Planning Commission members can be removed from a case, or cases can be overturned or remanded back because of the appearance or actual bias in the decision-making process. We've added some language about how the Planning Commission would handle a motion that they might want to reconsider, because that was not addressed at all in our bylaws. We updated the citations, and then we added language to specifically allow the chair to establish time limits for public hearings so that there can be some sort of sense of order and process, and not just an unending dialogue. So those were pretty much the most significant changes. Again, the Planning Commission talked about this with the board at your July 20th joint meeting. We have not scheduled another joint meeting at this time, but I know that as part of that, we would want to look forward to having additional discussion about bylaw revisions. And with that, I will conclude my presentation, and I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
I am looking around to see if anyone has any questions or comments on the bylaws.
Well, I have a general question. This is Chris Farrar speaking. Are we going to sort of have a discussion about some of these changes, and with the idea that we express our thoughts on whether the changes should be included in the final bylaws, or are these the bylaws and that's it? My understanding, and in fact, in this revised edition of the bylaws, Article 9, the very last article, says that the Planning Commission is authorized to develop and amend these bylaws consistent with blah, blah, blah. So I'm assuming that even though these are proposed new revised bylaws, that we could step in as a commissioners now and kind of head off changes before they get made that maybe we don't think are quite exactly what would be the best bylaws to have for our commission. So I know I kind of take a long time to say what I mean, but are we considering right now suggesting revisions to these proposed bylaws?
What I suggest that we do today is have a discussion. I think we've already started to have that discussion in that joint meeting, but this is just us and the public and staff. So I think what I would love to do is come to some consensus over, some points that we'd like to make going into the next step of these bylaws revisions. I think many of us would have liked to have been the first stop in the revising of these bylaws, and in fact being the instigator as laid out in this bylaws, but I think that's water under the bridge at this point. So let's try to see if we can kind of positively move some suggestions forward based in what, not us individually think, but what we think is the best for the county, right? Like how has the Planning Commission been working and not working, and how, like, say we're not on the commission, we're all gone 100 years from now. I'm sure there'll be some bylaw revisions in the next 5 years, but what of these will make things better, and what of things might make things worse? Let's try to think about it that way, I think. So with that in mind, I had a question for Director Henriksen. In your review of other county and city bylaws, did you find suggested or example language that would allow, if there are term limits, people to go back on again after a year or two, for example? I'm thinking of my grandmothers who lived to be 96 and 101, and I'm only 45 or 46 now. So it's possible that I just do 4 years on this Planning Commission, go away, and in 10 years have the opportunity to come back. I think under this current language, that precludes me from doing that. I only use myself as an example because it's me, but I'm wondering if you saw examples of that.
Yeah, I do not remember specific examples of that, Chair. I would need to go back and double check, but I don't recall seeing that type of language. I don't think the intent is necessarily to say you have 10 years in your total lifetime, and then you're forever banned from participating on the Planning Commission again. But I think it was intended, as I read other bylaws from other jurisdictions, to allow changes in commission members so that people had a wider opportunity to offer their services to the jurisdiction.
Does County Council have history seeing something like that? Or is there a way that we could just clarify that, just to make sure that it's clear? Because I think with the language currently, it's not clear that it's not a lifetime ban.
I think that any recommendations to clarify, I think if they're well thought out, will be seriously considered by the board. So I certainly think a lifetime, as you put it, as a lifetime ban, certainly if we could think of some unintended consequences, perhaps, maybe that might be a good way of refining it, to say something like that folks would not be precluded in the future, or you could say it's continuous, a number of years of service, something like that. That might be some additional language you might choose to recommend, if that helps.
Thank you very much. Thoughts on, should we just focus in on this right now? So thoughts on term limits, and also on that second aspect of if there were term limits, making it clear that it's not that people can never come back on, it's just that that you can do up to 10 years of continuous service, take a break, and then be able to come back on. And I know Commissioner Johnson, you're on the phone, so I can't see you, and others of you are not on video. So please feel free to just get my attention by voice if needed. Commissioner Johnson and Wong, I haven't heard from you yet. Thoughts on those things?
Well, this is Kerry. I'm just listening in, and I can hear you just fine. I'm just listening in here, so I don't have anything to add right now.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Kwong?
Yes, I guess my concern is that we know that we have a hard time getting people to participate in the county, because I don't know if it's lack because we don't have enough people, or just lack of interest. And if we, let's just say, limit someone, and the limits run out, and we can't get anybody else to appoint to the commissions, and then what happened then? Are these commissioners banned, let's say, for life, and we have no one else to take his or her place?
Thank you, Commissioner Farrar.
Well, actually, the way it's proposed revision does have a way out of that. In the last, I think it's the last phrase of the Article 3, Item B, it says that the board may extend the term of a planning commission member if it's in the public interest to do so. So that would cover that situation, but I guess my feeling is that with that provision in there and the fact that elsewhere it's clear that any planning commissioner serves at the goodwill of the county commission, that they may remove any planning commissioner they wish to at any time. I see no need for this particular section of the membership article. It just seems superfluous to have it in there, and bylaws should be streamlined to the best degree possible. And the whole concept of term limits is unnecessary, because when a term comes near end, announcement is put out. Anybody in the county that's a resident of age can apply, and then the sitting Board of Commissioners can simply select from either the sitting member, if they choose to rerun, or from a new applicant. And there's no need that somebody sit there for 20, 30, 40 years without the Board of Commissioners being able to do anything about it. In a very fair and open way, they can just simply select someone else that applies for that position. And if the sitting member feels compelled to want to stay on beyond 8 or 10 years, so be it. Let them do it. I just don't see a need for it. And I think it just puts a lot of extra words and stuff into bylaws that don't need to be there, that doesn't serve any valuable purpose whatsoever. But if the current Board of Commissioners just feels they really want to have this in there, then I would go along with the idea that it certainly not be a lifetime matter, and that I'm not really sure about specifying some interlude of a year or two, but certainly after 2 to 4 years, I don't see why somebody couldn't get back on there. It's just that my experience with this commission is that the people that have been on for the longest really had a lot to offer when it came down to discussions around significant planning issues and the discussions around actual permit applications that came before us. And I always appreciated the people that had that history and that knowledge. And unless there's some good reason beyond just some arbitrary number of years, I don't see doing away with that. Bruce Francis was on for something close to 20 years, and he always had excellent discussion points, and it takes years to develop that. You know, I've been on for, I don't know, 4 years or something. I barely know this stuff yet. Maybe I shouldn't admit that, because I'm supposed to know all about planning, but the applicants you get, chances are, will take years before they achieve a reasonable level of understanding of how the system works, what they can legally do, what they should consider, how to be ethical and how to treat people right and all those things. It takes time, and experience is worth a lot. And so I would just emphasize over and over again that the provision's unneeded, and it will, in the long run, do nothing but reduce the effectiveness of the commission, and that there's easy ways that the Board of Commissioners can have commission members that they think are the best qualified, that have shown an interest to serve. So that's my rambling comment on that.
Thank you. Commissioner Orr, unless you're going to talk, and I'd love for you to talk, but could you mute your speaker for me?
Yes, just a moment. I wasn't sure whether that I was going to be able to hear you there, so let me work on this.
Okay, Orr, but we'd love to hear your view on term limits if you'd like to mention it since you're on.
Okay, did that help? Is it still doing it?
Yeah, well, a little echoey, but just quick, and then mute yourself.
Okay, I did actually mute my phone, but is that better?
Yeah, that sounds okay.
Okay. There were a lot of comments made by Commissioner Farrar. I share his concern that this is a solution and work in search of a problem. I would also add that if under one hypothetical situation, a commissioner with a lot of experience, or just who had been exceeded the 4-year term limit or whatever it is thereafter excluded from continued participation in the Planning Commission, and this is a big and, there is nobody stepping forward to do the volunteer work and the reading and all that to replace that individual, why then you will have an empty seat. And I fail to see how that situation, if it's plausible, would improve the situation that the term limit would seek to address.
All right, thank you. There was a little confusion, I think, at that last joint meeting over, it seemed like at least some of the county commission were big supporters of term limits. But I was left a little confused, and I talked to the county administrator afterwards and clarify if I'm wrong, County Counsel and Director Henriksen. But I believe that the county commission itself does not have term limits. Is that right?
Sorry, took a second to find my mic. That is correct. There are no term limits on the county commissioners.
So it's interesting that there would be term limits with the Planning Commission, and I don't believe other committees that I know of have term limits. Maybe, again, correct me if I'm wrong, but I haven't seen it, in the Parks Committee or others. So I might just note that, that if I do like, that there's some standardization that the county commission has been doing, like, for example, for some years has been working on, for good reason, has been working on, statements of roles and responsibilities and updating bylaws and doing more training so that we can function better and more professionally as an organization. But it would be nice if there was some consistency. So now we have our own roles and responsibilities, I believe, for the first time that some or if not all of you have signed already. And then we're updating these bylaws. But I think if there were term limits in this commission, it might make sense to also look at term limits in other, in the county commission itself and in the other committees, if it's seen as something that's very valuable. Otherwise, it feels targeted towards this particular one, I have to say. So I'm wondering if we can get to like a consensus statement to share on this issue with the county commission. Like, do we all agree that term limits do or don't make sense? Do we all agree that if they did happen, that we wanted to make sure it was clear that people could get back on after a year or two? What, how do we, should we have like a quick discussion about that, or a show of hands? Well, a show of voices maybe. I'm hearing, okay, so you've heard me in the past and today, like, I don't think we need term limits. I don't think Chris or Commissioner Farrar thinks that we need term limits. Commissioner Strickland, Kwong, and Orr, what is your view on that?
I say no. This is Commissioner Kwong. Yeah.
Commissioner Orr,
Not needed.
Commissioner Strickland.
For the Board of Commissioners has total power simply with a motion and a majority to eliminate anyone without cause that they don't like. I think it's stupid.
All right, thank you for that. Commissioner Johnson, do you have a view on that?
I do. Well, generally, I'm in favor of term limits. I think we do serve at the pleasure of the commission, as Commissioner Strickland has said. And I think if you view these as more of a guideline rather than rule, that would be good enough for me. I mean, it says we can serve 8 years and up to 2 years beyond that. And the commission also has the ultimate authority in the matter. So yeah, I could go either way on that. I don't have a strong opinion on the matter, but I do think it's important to, you know, not have lifetime appointments either, where we can allow for additional citizen involvement as well, not just someone being on there forever. So that's my 2 cents.
Thank you, Commissioner Johnson. So it feels like, as Commissioner Johnson said, he could go either way. The rest of us are kind of like, we don't believe it's needed. I wonder if we can just, you know, what kind of a statement do you need, Director Henriksen, to bring to them in your next memo?
I don't know that we need a formal statement. I think that the Planning Commission members have been clear in what their views are on term limits. So we have 5 who would not support them, 1 who could possibly go either way, and I think that would just be what staff would put in their summary.
Okay, and then would you also add that comment around clarifying that if we did have it, that it wasn't a lifetime? Yeah, that would be great. Okay, other issues from the bylaws that the commissioners would like to discuss. Commissioner Farrar.
Under Article 3 membership, Section C, there's membership qualifications listed. I think it's good to have a diverse representation from different parts of the county and to limit the number of people engaged in similar businesses and so on. But I do think, even though it's probably highly unlikely, but I got to thinking about it, and I think that there should be an item 4 that says that no county commissioner or member of the community development staff may serve on the planning commission. As I say, it's probably highly unlikely that one of the board of commissioners would have enough spare time around to want to take on planning commission, but it would seem to me to be inappropriate to have that result if it were to come about.
That's not one I've ever thought of. Takes sharp minds and long time planning to get that. Thank you, Commissioner Farrar. I had written a letter before our joint meeting with the County Commission from July 13th, and I just want to bring up this hasn't been changed since then. So I was just hoping, so under attendance, and I really appreciate Director Henriksen clarifying that, what's really an issue is unexcused, well, now tardiness and absences. But it still says members shall attend all meetings except in the case of illnesses. And so to me, I feel like it should say something more like, members shall attend all meetings as possible, and then continue to say what the actual rules are, because there's so many important things that can get in the way of volunteer work, which this is, including illness, but also, work and childcare and things like that. And so I just feel like having that illness thing is saying, that's the one reason why you might be able to have an excused or unexcused absence. So, so I would you could either delete that first sentence and just get straight to what the rules are around 3 excused absences and 2 unexcused absences, or just amend, like dropping the illness part. Anything else? Do people feel okay about that? Yeah, Commissioner Farrar.
I think it'd be helpful if you give the article and section. I know what you're talking about, the statement, so you don't have to go back, but for anybody else, if you have a point, if you could just give us the article and section number. I have a quick one that.
So sorry, Chris, I just wanted to, Commissioner Farrar, I just wanted to say it's on the screen right now. So it's 3D attendance.
Oh,
thank you.
Okay, I spend a lot of my time looking off to the side here at my hard copy, and I don't even see what's on the screen sometimes. Sorry about that. Anyway, I have a quick point, and it's sort of for discussion, and I'm kind of wondering why it is, and this refers to Article 4, Section A, and it talks about, oh, wait a second, no, sorry about that. It's Article 3, and it's Section F, vacancies, and it talks about when the vacancies are filled, and it's on July 1st. And then later, we talk about electing officers, and that's done at the January 1st meeting, or the first meeting of the calendar year. And to me, it's fine if commission members start their terms on July 1st. That's the fiscal year, so it makes sense. But it seems like that's the meeting we should elect the new officers instead of, for example, what if the chair does not decide to rerun, or they're termed out or whatever, and then come July 1, they're out of office, but we don't elect a new officer until January. It just seems like those two things should take place at essentially the same time. Does anybody else have an opinion on that?
I also look to Director Henriksen if has that worked up to now? I know that July 1st, I was confused about that also, and that is actually the current practice, July 1st. I know we've sometimes forgotten to do the elections, I feel like, in the past, but is it working the way that now, or does what Commissioner Farrar say make sense?
Well, it certainly makes sense what Commissioner Farrar has said. Your current bylaws do have the election of officers at the first meeting in January. What has happened, and we have had elections every year, it's just that oftentimes people have been very hesitant to step up to the vice chair role. I know that maybe a year or two ago we delayed it several months in a row because we either didn't have a full contingent of planning commission members at the meeting or people were hesitant to step up to fill the role. I think it makes sense to do it on July 1st. Conversely, some people may say that by having election of officers immediately when new members have started, people may not feel comfortable stepping into that role. Delaying it by 6 months gives them an opportunity to understand what the duties might be and, you know, have a better idea of how to run a meeting. So I leave it to the discretion of the Planning Commission.
Other thoughts on that? Commissioner Orr, Johnson, Kwong, Strickland? Strickland.
Just that I don't think it takes a whole lot of wit to run a meeting. You know, on the idea of, gee, I'm going to have to be here for months to learn how to chair a meeting. You know, my presumption is that most of us have, since elementary school, served on little boards, and it doesn't take heavy duty training on basic Robert's rules of order, how to run a meeting.
With all due respect, I will say I study to be the chair of this committee in particular. I have a script that I write for every meeting because I am not Bruce Francis, who's done this for 30 years. And so I will say, like, I agree with you. A lot of us have a lot of experience, but it's different running a planning commission or a county commission meeting because it's so much more formal. And it can be intimidating. You know, it certainly has been intimidating to me to get started. And so, and I'm not easily intimidated. So I appreciate what Director Henderson was saying, is that I think it is true that even in this room, not everybody wants to be chair or vice chair. And so it's an amazing opportunity when we get new people on the commission to invite them up to leadership right away. A lot of people are, you know, kind of tired of doing it. And so I kind of do I think I tend towards that. It's fine if it's 6 months, and, you know, give those people at least some time to get used to what it's like and get some training under them before they, you know, all of a sudden become vice chair, if not chair. What do you think, Commissioner Farrar? Can you go either way, or do you feel strongly still about moving that to July 1st?
I can go either way. It was more a point of discussion, and I understand both points, and they occurred to me. But to me, it's, you still need that. You still may have that situation where a chair is not, the sitting chair does not cross the line into the new fiscal year on July 1. And so if you don't, then you hold a special election, I guess, for a chair at that time. But
yeah, how does that work, Director or County Council, about like if someone, you know, leaves midterm, could we have an interim person? How does that mess up the 1-year terms?
Yeah, so in the case of the absence of the vice chair or the chair, the vice chair becomes the chair. So if the chair were not reappointed or, you know, moved out of town or out of state, as the case may be, the vice chair then would take on the roles and responsibilities of the chair.
And then would we have a new vice chair, or we just wait till the next election?
I don't think we spelled that out. We only discussed what would happen if both the chair and the vice chair were absent, in which case the remaining members would elect a temporary chair for a particular meeting. I don't, and I'll defer to County Council, but I wouldn't see anything that would prohibit you from electing a new chair, vice chair, if the chair did not continue and the vice chair moved up to fill that position.
I agree with you, Director Henriksen. I think you could, I mean, if something was to happen, you never know what's going to happen, right? I think for purposes of an election, these are guidelines. We can certainly vary from them as the need arises.
Thank you.
So again, I'll just say it doesn't matter to me either way, so maybe just leave it how it is so we don't have so many changes.
Okay. All right, it is 11:40, so maybe we can spend another 5 minutes or so if we have final suggestions. This is our opportunity to provide our written feedback prior to the next joint meeting with the county commission, and hopefully we can close this door and finish it so it doesn't need to be another thing we're working on while embarking on the comprehensive planning update in a more deep way starting this month. So final thoughts, like, you know, the overreaching ideas around this, I think have not, you know, these bylaws haven't changed, you know, so substantially. Everything else feel okay to people? Any final comments or concerns? Commissioner Farrar.
I have a couple of quick points, and it kind of relates to, and I don't know if bylaws are the place to put them, but our obligation as a public commission to publicize our meetings. And I notice under Article 6, Section A, meetings is addressed, and under Section 3 of that, it talks about the place and hour of a meeting may be changed if adequate notice is given. And I think we should specify what amount of time is needed. Is that a week, or is 10 days, or is it 24 hours? I think we need to be careful, and again, maybe the bylaws isn't the place it needs to be, but we need to be careful that we let the public know of our meetings in a timely way and in a way that's easy for them to find or just run across. So is there something about our need to publish a public notice in the local news media for every meeting? And is there's also, under these strange times we live in, is there a need to have a provision in there that some of our meetings may be held virtually only if circumstances are such that meeting in person is either unhealthy or not easily possible following, say, a disaster or something? These are just questions. Should those things be put into the bylaws, or do those go somewhere else? And I promise I won't say anything more for the rest of the meeting.
Your comments are always welcomed, Commissioner Farrar. Don't ever apologize. I believe that all of our meetings, virtual or not, are subject to public hearings law. And so where it's not, I don't know that it is necessary to put that in here. We might just note that you know, that it's, because what you don't want to do is say what the public hearings law is in this and then have to change it if it changes down the line, right? So there's got to be probably a document in the county that regulates that. I see Joanna nodding down there, so I know she has something to say. And then also around the virtual, that's a great point. This is a new reality, so how do we make sure that we're not afoul of the rules around that? I know it's actually required to provide that opportunity now. It's a new law.
Absolutely, and I think, Chair Gardner, you are absolutely correct. So state law, and it does change from time to time. So we are in compliance with state law, and I think I would recommend that you all provide guidance to staff about what you would like to see, and that rest assured we do follow state law. And as far as publishing and what our publishing requirements are for any public meetings. I will note that virtual public meetings. I think although they can be very challenging, as you all experience, of who's going to mute what and when are we going to have somebody speak, it can be challenging. It's also been beneficial for folks who may have disabilities that want to attend meetings. It certainly is easier for a number of folks to attend virtual meetings. So with that in mind, the Oregon legislature has required all public bodies, if possible, to have hybrid meetings when we're able to go back in and have that meeting schedule where some of the folks are in the room and some of them are not. I know we all are on a virtual meeting today, and I don't think that the Board of Commissioners is going to be leading the charge to go back to in-person meetings until obviously COVID is not as disruptive. So hearing all of that, yes, we have plans to continue with the virtual meetings into the near future, and are trying hard on a county level to create a platform where we can accommodate the hybrid meetings. But as you all discovered there in that last joint meeting, that was very technically difficult, and we had a lot of technical people in the room that were hidden, you couldn't see them, and so we're trying to accommodate as many people as possible. But I think your comments are well stated. We want as many people to be attending these meetings as possible. Thank you.
So maybe that section that you're referring to there, Commissioner Farrar, it could say, instead of, like, it actually could acknowledge the rule, like, or, you know, as per public hearings law, current public hearings law, or something like that, just so it's really clear that it's not this or that, but it is the required. It says if adequate notice can be given to the public. So maybe we say something like, you know, via the public hearings rules or something. All right, I heard Commissioner Farrar is done. You don't have to be, though. Anybody else want to bring up any comments or questions before we move on from this agenda item? So what I hear is the next step is a potential another joint meeting with the county commission on this topic. It doesn't feel like, though, that there's that much more work and discussion that's needed, if, you know, because in the end, it's the county commission's decision to adopt or not adopt bylaw changes. So if we were going to do that, is the idea that there be other topics on the agenda too, so that we can move forward in that productive way? What's the idea there?
One of the other topics that we would like to include would be discussion about the comprehensive plan update process, and then whatever other topics that the Planning Commission would like to request as well.
I think the comp plan is a big topic, and I think it would be good to spend some time on that if it's just an hour. You know, always I think we will always express that we'd love to, you know, somehow be involved in supporting affordable housing in the county. So that's another discussion that maybe we might have is there something that we could be working on? You know, I know they're spending a lot of time on the low income housing development, potentially up near Astoria and Warrenton. But are there other projects that we can work on that make sense to support that effort? You know, that being said, of course, the comp plan itself is a monster. So it may be that, you know, we have these discussions and we wait until we have more, both staff and the commissioners have more space to be able to work on special projects like that. Anything else that commissioners would be interested in talking to the county commission about? I'm sure a lot of these topics will come up as we talk about the comp plan as well. I know climate change is one issue that many of you are concerned about. I don't know how we would approach that in a joint meeting, but All right, well, let's move on. I'm not seeing any hands, nobody's speaking up. Okay, let's move on to the project status report. It has been provided in your packets. Scrolling down, scrolling up, scrolling down. Are there any questions from the commissioners on the project status report? So these are, I think Commissioner Johnson, this might be new to you since you've been on the commission. We, a couple years ago, asked staff to provide this report, just, you know, the hearings that we've had in the Planning Commission, you know, what have been the results so that we can kind of better track whether things are moving forward or not, or changing. Any questions or comments on this status report? Okay, Commissioner Farrar.
Well, obviously that one with the expired permit, the McVeigh livery, is that then a finished deal? We're not going to see that anymore. That's definitely not going forward.
That's correct, yes.
All right, let's move on. I'm just going to look at the chat here for a second. I'm seeing that Jen Mitchell is requesting that the comp plan, CAC, and community groups get these links as well. And Susanna Gladwin, I see your comment also, and we'll take that into consideration. She's interested in us thinking about the territorial sea and wave energy. All right, let's move on to the director's report. Director Henriksen, would you please present? Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, so there are several items happening here. I pulled up the county calendar on Friday, September 24th at 10 a.m. Our first virtual town hall public meeting will be held to discuss revisions, the first round of revisions to the short-term rental ordinances. And there's information available on the calendar item, and there's also a web page that's been set up under land use planning if you go to our planning page. This Thursday, we have 2 meetings regarding the Tsunami Evacuation Facilities Improvement Plan. The first meeting is our Project Advisory Committee at 3 p.m. and then at 6 p.m. is our second public meeting. And I would strongly encourage everyone, I believe I copied you all on an email reminding you of this upcoming meeting date, and if you could forward that out to others as well. We did not have very strong attendance at our first public town hall meeting, which was also virtual. We had 8 people, which included staff and the consultants. So it's really imperative that we get more public input at that public meeting at 6 p.m. Thursday. And then,
sorry, Director Henriksen, sorry, that's been it's rebranded, right? So is that the Lewis and Clark project?
No.
Okay.
It has not been rebranded. It has been this project since we submitted the grant for it in 2019. And that's a grant through the Transportation and Growth Management Program, which is a partnership between ODOT and DLCD. And we were awarded the grant in 2019, and it's to look at how we can use recreational trails and work with them as evacuation routes as well, so that you don't just have a route that sits idle the majority of the time until an emergency happens. The goal is to be able to identify places where trails can be included in the recreational system, what type of amenities that they might need to have, with the overall goal of making the public familiar with them just through everyday use, that when an emergency does happen, they're more likely to remember and know where to go to get to safety. What we have been finding out is that a lot of our trails are either counterintuitive, where to get to high ground, you're actually running to the west to where the tsunami would be coming in, or they're in areas where we can't create connections, or they're in areas where there's going to be significant liquefaction and you won't be able to be able to cross those areas. So one of the recommendations that's starting to come out of this project now is vertical evacuation structures. And that's one thing that we'll be talking about on Thursday evening.
That's really interesting. Thank you. So, and I assume you have involvement of like Lewis and Clark National History Park and others for that?
We have been sending out notices to anybody and everyone who will take them. They are not on our project advisory committee. We've got representatives from some of the cities, some of the hiking clubs, mountain biking clubs, the Astoria Senior Center. Can't remember off the top of my head who else is on there.
ODF?
We did invite ODF. We also invited some of the private timber landowners as well, because obviously their land's going to play an important role in any trail use or evacuation routes that we're going to be working on.
Okay. I might send you just an email afterwards just to clarify so I can help get information out to people. Okay, everybody hear that? Could you help share that with your constituencies via social media or email or just talking to them at the coffee shop?
Yep.
Okay, and then tomorrow, sorry, you're kind of jumping forward, but don't we have isn't there a county commission meeting tomorrow?
Yeah, so I'm getting to the board meeting schedule. So tomorrow at 10 o'clock, there is a work session. The board will be discussing goals 1 through 4 of the comprehensive plan again. At that first meeting, 2 of the 5 board members were not available for that meeting, so they're going to reopen the discussion, and that's at 10 o'clock. On the 22nd of September, that's their regular work session and meeting, which begins at 5 p.m. We will be talking about Goal 5, and again, this is a continuation of a previous discussion. And if you remember back to the beginning of our meeting, Goal 5 is the big one. That's the catch-all for all other duties as assigned. So there's a lot for them to talk about. We'll also be doing on September 22nd, the first reading of revisions to Article 4 of the Law Doc, which your Planning Commission looked at last month and made a recommendation to the board. So that will be moving forward on September 22nd. On October 13th, we'll do the second reading for that. On October 20th at 10 a.m., there's a daytime work session. The board will be discussing goals 6, 8, and 13 of the comprehensive plan. October 27th at 5 p.m. at their regular work session and meeting, the board will be talking about planning commission appointment, because we do have a 7th member on the planning commission, and that was Myrna Patrick's position, and she resigned in February of this year. So we're going to hopefully have some discussion at the work session. We have 5 applicants right now, and so we'll be bringing those forward. We do have time, so if you have anyone that you know who's interested in applying for the Planning Commission, please encourage them to do so. We're accepting applications year-round, 24/7, so and we'll just be holding on to those for a 2-year period. On November 10th, we will be hearing a presentation from the consultants to talk about the Tsunami Evacuation Facilities Improvement Program, and that will be at a work session at 5 o'clock. If needed, at the regular meeting on November 10th, we will be doing an extension of the short-term rental moratorium, a first reading of that if we need it. So we'll see how that goes. On December 1st, and I believe these are all daytime workshops at 10 a.m., the board will be discussing Goal 10. On December 15th, they will be discussing goals 11, 12, and 14. On January 5th, they will be discussing goals 16 and 17. And on January 19th, they will be discussing goals 18 and 19. Did I say 16 and 17? And then 18 and 19. February, there are 2 work sessions, February 2nd and February 16th, where the board will be looking at the community plans that are coming out of our planning area citizen advisory committees. And then we anticipate in May and June weekly sessions with the board to go back over the recommendations on the goals that the Planning Commission will be presenting over the next 8 months to them. So there's a lot coming up. Almost weekly, we will probably be discussing the comp plan. We're also looking at getting that joint meeting scheduled. A date has not been set up yet. And also at some point, we would like to do a 2-hour training with the board that would be open to the public, but to go over with them some of the, well, not some, but all the statewide planning goals, training similar to what we worked with the Planning Commission today. I think that's everything. Thank you. Any questions?
That's a lot. Thank you for your diligent work, Director Henriksen. I know that's more than a full-time job right there. Any questions or comments from the commissioners? I don't see any. I just have one. Sorry, go ahead.
I just wanted to say, I just want to thank staff. It's planning staff who's really doing this work, Julia Decker, Ian Siss, and Jason Pollock. So they really should be getting the credit for this.
Good acknowledgement. Thank you all, for sure. I had one question around Planning Commission appointments. I think historically, whenever any committee on the county, in the county had openings, that was when there was like kind of a call for applications and there was a particular period. Could you explain why our commission in particular is just year-round open now? And is that going to be the case for all the committees, or?
I cannot speak to all the committees. I know that there has been some work to help develop a more standardized process in how committee members are advertised for and recruited and then presented to the board. So that's been an internal staff thing. I know that when we started the process back in January, February of replacing Bruce Francis and Myrna Patrick, that there was discussion at the board level that they wanted to have the process remain open so that we were continually collecting a pool of applicants that we could draw from. And that's often standard procedure in other places where I've been, that you just have the position open and then, or the recruitment period is always open. And then as openings become available, you contact those applicants to see if they're still interested and then bring them forward to the appointment.
And would the county also like put out kind of like a new call just knowing that there were openings, or would it just be like kind of more passive then?
No, when a vacancy occurs, then there is a process where we notify the county manager's office, and then they will handle the advertisements and press releases for any vacancies on any of the committees.
Thank you. I see a question from one of our public members in the meeting today, just asking about upcoming Planning Commission and county-wide comp plan meeting dates. So that's actually one that was I didn't hear. So the end of this month, could you just reiterate that?
Yeah, sorry, I missed that one completely. It's September 28th, and it will be at 9 o'clock. And that is a joint meeting of the Planning Commission and the Countywide Citizen Advisory Committee. And we will be working on goals 1 through 4. So our packet will go out on the 21st, so be on the lookout for that. And then the meeting will be the 28th at 9 a.m.
That's a really important one for everybody in the room. So get that on your calendars, please. It'll probably be a pretty long one. So have a snack in front of you and a cup of tea or coffee or Red Bull. And to the public also, you're welcome to attend those as well. They should be interesting or tedious, depending on your mindset. Again, I want to point out the county website has a calendar. There's so many of those comp plan meetings coming up. So, you know, bookmark that that site. I always have to go to it to figure out what I'm doing one particular day. So yeah, it's right in front of us right now on the screen, and is a great resource. And as packets, agendas, and packets become available, there's just a direct link from this calendar. So you don't have to go into the committee or into the Planning Commission or the County Commission. You can just go straight through the calendar, so you can see that there. All right, so final questions or comments from the Planning Commission today. We're going to close out this meeting. Everyone enjoy this gorgeous fall day. We really appreciate all of you for being in the room and all the work that you bring and the knowledge and skills. I'm just going to make a quick comment, a plug for vaccines. As the chair of the Planning Commission, I want to encourage all of you to help protect our community by, if you haven't already, getting one of the available COVID-19 vaccines. Almost 650,000 Americans have died of this terrible virus. And I know we're all hoping that we'll get back to some normalcy soon with the minimal loss of life. I know most of you have seen that President Biden is now mandating vaccines for a lot of people, but it's not gonna impact us too much here because we don't have that many businesses that have more than 100 people. But we are expecting, I actually am on the Arch Cape Domestic Water Supply Board, and we just got a notice from the the Special Districts Association of Oregon that it's expected that those mandates will be kind of trickling down through the state, and it may be a requirement of counties and cities as well. And so I'm hopeful that our counties and cities will also step up, and unfortunately having to push the dial a little bit through those mandates. I find that to be unfortunate, but an important reality for getting past this terrible situation. Thank you very much, and everybody have a lovely day, and we will see you at one of these many meetings, but definitely at the September 28th, 9 a.m. CAC PC meeting and next month's Planning Commission meeting. Thanks, everybody. Have a great day.